welcome all. I'm delighted to have each of you here tonight. Tonight we have a special guest speaker who is Jacinta Astles, and she is a passionate person towards gender equality and diversity. And she is a feminist activist and a researcher. She holds a master's degree in Gender and Peacebuilding from the University for Peace and is certified as a self-defense instructor from Empowerment Self-Defense Global. She is currently working to promote the human rights of migrants through education. Her project, Queer and Here, focuses on promoting gender equality through self-defense workshops. She has also published a book chapter titled "It's Not Easy to Fight Against the System: Eliminating Violence Against Women in Latin America Through Empowerment, Self-Defense in the Journey to Gender Equality, Mapping the Implementation of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action." So, Jacinta, floor is yours, and have a pleasant webinar.
Thank you so much for the lovely introduction, and thank you to RFP UK and EcoPeace Cafe for inviting me to speak, and also to all the participants for joining today. I'm really excited to be able to share a bit with you and also learn from you. I hope that this space can be one in which we all share and interact with each other, because I'm sure we all have contributions and experiences to share regarding the topic of gender equality. So just give me one moment to share my screen. I have a short presentation. Okay. Can you confirm that you can see the presentation?
Yes, we can see.
Yes. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay. So today, this is a quick overview of what we're going to look at in the presentation, and then we will also have breakout rooms. So we're going to look at how gender equality is defined, and what are gender stereotypes, how can they be addressed, what are some of the barriers to gender equality, and practical steps that we can take to improve gender equality. And then I'm also going to share a case study of a local and regional initiative, which was mentioned in the introduction, which is empowerment self-defense in Latin America. And then we're going to look at what we can do as individuals and in our communities to promote gender equality in the breakout rooms. Okay, so first of all, I would like to hear from you. What comes to mind when you think of gender equality? So please go to Slido and enter in the code on the screen, and we'll see what are your answers. So it should be an anonymous poll. You can also use your phone to scan the QR code. And there's no wrong answers. So I just love to hear what comes to mind or what you think of when you think of gender equality. Equal opportunities, respect, freedom. Those are great answers. You can see a lot more answers coming in. Respecting life, valuing each other, equal opportunities, understanding, compassion, equal rights. So I can see two trends coming out here. We can see on the one hand, equal opportunities. Also respect is coming up a lot. That's why it's the biggest word. And then also equal rights, equal responsibilities. So I think this is great because we can see that it's not just about, for example, equal rights, that all people have the right to vote, for example, but it's also equal opportunities. For example, that we all have the opportunity to go to school or high school or university. We all have an opportunity to have a job in all different fields if that's what we want to do. understanding each other, respecting each other, valuing each other. So it's not only about our rights and opportunities in our communities and societies, but also the way we interact with each other and ensuring that there's respect there and value between people. And I think this is coming like the opposite of discrimination, right? So that's great. Thank you all for sharing your reflections. I think that really sums up a lot of the different aspects of gender equality. And I think it really shows that it's not just one thing, there's all different parts to it, and all different aspects that go from the individual to the community, to the national, to the global level. So I wanted to share quickly a definition from UN Women of gender equality, which also shows what I was just mentioning, that there's all different aspects. So it's about the equal rights, responsibilities, and opportunities for women and men, girls and boys, and people of all genders. So I think that was really well reflected in the exercise we just did. So equality does not mean that everyone needs to be the same, but it means that we all have the same rights, responsibilities, and opportunities, regardless of whether we're born female or male. And it's about also recognizing that there's a lot of diversity within all of us as humans in the world. So there's a lot of diversity between men and women, between people of all genders. So we don't want to just consider that all women are the same or all men are the same and want the same things, but that we have the opportunity to choose what we want for our own lives. And it also mentions that gender equality is a human rights issue and is also a central aspect for sustainable people-centered development. Okay, so I also wanted to share a statistic from the Global Gender Gap Report from 2023. So this is a report published each year by the World Economic Forum, which they study all the countries in the world, or most countries in the world, according to different aspects, and then they make a finding of how far we are from achieving gender equality. So this year, the global gender gap is 68.4% out of 100. So we're still missing like 31.6% to achieve gender equality on a global scale. And I wanted to invite you to have a look at the Global Gender Gap Index. Perhaps this is something we can do in the breakout rooms or at the end, because we're running a little bit short of time, but I will share the link in the chat once I finish the presentation. And you can go on and choose a country and see what their rating is in these 4 pillars. So there's economy, education, health, and politics. This is just an example of Brazil. You can see that they are quite high in gender equality for education and health, and they're in the middle in economy, and they're quite low when it comes to politics. So this is just an example of one of the profiles that you can go and explore. So we can see that in this measurement of gender equality, it's considering these 4 aspects. So it's another way for us to understand what is gender equality and how can we work towards it. So later on in the breakout rooms, we're going to be discussing specific issues and barriers to gender equality in your community. So maybe you can also think about a specific issue relating to one of these 4 areas. So for example, maybe you've seen that in your area, girls don't have as much access to education, to school as boys, or maybe most of the politicians and people with political power are men. And so this just gives you sort of a starting point to start to think about what do you think are the big issues for gender equality in your community. And now I wanted to move on to gender stereotypes, which sometimes or most of the time are one of the root causes of gender equality. They're the underlying ideas that we have about men, women, and people of all genders. And often they influence a lot of gender inequalities. So once again, please jump over to Slido and let's have a look at some of the gender stereotypes that we've seen in our communities or that we've heard of, maybe comments that people have made. For example, women are better at cooking than men, or maybe men are better at sports than women. So I wanted to hear from you, what are some gender stereotypes you've heard? Women's places in the kitchen, yeah, and girls like pink and boys like blue. That's a very common one. Women are better at childcare, yes. Color associations, yeah. Lifting weights is for men, and care work is for women or females. Girls are calmer and kinder. Men are messy. Women are better in dresses. Yeah, there's a lot of stereotypes of what women should or should not wear. Girls talk a lot. Can see somebody else is typing. Oh, 3 people are typing. These are really great. Not the stereotypes themselves, but the ideas that are coming out. That men are better with money. I think this is a really good example. So there's maybe a stereotype that men are better with money than women. So then they tend to have more control of financial resources, and women tend to have to depend on the men in their lives for their financial resources. They don't have that kind of independence. So that's how we can see that stereotypes about gender can then be translated into real life impacts in terms of access to resources or access to opportunities. Men don't feel pain and don't cry. Women are emotional, yeah. Women leaders need more support. Men are better leaders. That's another one that perhaps contributes to the political inequality between men and women that we just saw, for example, with Brazil, that political inequality is very low. Okay, I can see here both negative and positive stereotypes. So, for example, men are better with money could be considered a positive stereotype because it's saying something positive about men. And then men are messy could be a negative stereotype. Would anyone like to reflect on maybe the impact of positive and negative stereotypes if one is has positive impacts, or if both are negative, or just any other reflections on your experiences with gender stereotypes? Feel free to open your mic or raise your hand. I don't think I can see the chat right now while I'm presenting. Maybe if somebody's writing in the chat, Greshma, you can let me know.
Yeah, Anthony shared that women are the religious element in the family. Men don't bother, and he shared that he has heard that once before. And also Nelly shared that women are timid, men are powerful. These are the two in the chat box.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think those ideas also really support what we're seeing on the screen. That girls shouldn't study, they should get married. Girls are emotional and boys are logical. So you can see that there's a lot of different stereotypes, right? That usually we absorb or we hear from when we're very young. And I think a really important thing to remember with gender stereotypes is really there's no such thing as a positive stereotype, because when you consider, for example, men are better with money. Okay, that doesn't sound negative. That doesn't sound so bad, right? That's a compliment. Men are good with money. But if you consider the opposite of that, it's saying that that means women are bad with money, right? So I think it's really important that we consider gender stereotypes that we may have heard, and consider that these kind of ideas that put this black and white thinking can be very harmful, because by saying men are better with money, it's automatically implying that women are worse with money, right? So we know that the world is full of all different shades of gray, and somebody may be good with money, may be bad with money, depending on a lot of different factors. That's not just about their gender, right? So I think that's just something really important to keep in mind when we hear any kind of stereotypes and any kind of comments like this. And also when we're thinking in our discussions about the barriers to gender equality. Okay, great. So let's keep going. I also wanted to discuss the concept of gender. So we often grow up with this idea that there are two genders. That's called the gender binary of male and female, or man and woman. But we also know that the gender is a spectrum, and there are many different genders beyond just these two. So non-binary persons who don't identify as either female or male, trans or transgender who were assigned male at birth and identify as a woman, or assigned female at birth and identify as a man, and gender fluid or genderqueer who may change their gender expression in a fluid way and do not necessarily identify as one particular gender. Okay. Are there any questions about these concepts before we move on? I lost my little Zoom box.
I have a doubt, like regarding the non-binary. So under non-binary, like earlier I thought like transgenders and non-binary are like in the one category. So can you please elaborate on that?
That's a really good question. So yes, most people do consider non-binary as part of trans or the transgender umbrella, because if I'm born female and I now identify as non-binary, that means that I've changed my gender identity. So generally the transgender is considered anybody who does not identify with the gender they were assigned at birth. So in this case, non-binary does fall under trans or transgender. Yeah, so. And also I want to point out that these categories are very Western categories. They're the ideas or the concepts that most often we find in the Western world, but in many other cultures around the world, there are different gender identities. There are third genders. For example, in Canada and the US, Native Americans have two-spirit people. In Indigenous Australia, there are sister girls and brother boys. So this is just a few examples of different gender identities, just so that we keep in mind that when we talk about gender equality, we're not only talking about men and women, but in your cultures and communities, there may also be different terms and different identities as well. So this is not an exhaustive list. Okay. So now an overview of the barriers to gender identity. I wanted to give you some ideas and some ways of considering what are the barriers and what are the ways that we can break down gender equality and try to understand it, try to make analyses in our communities, and try to see from those analyses how can we try and find solutions. So one of the ways that we can start to think about what are different barriers are by looking at the different levels. So we have individual and family, and then community. Sorry for the mistake there. Province or state level, national, and then international. And then within each of those levels, we can think about different kind of challenges and different stakeholders that may be involved. So at the individual or family level, perhaps there's certain families that don't allow their daughters to go to school, but their sons are allowed. And then at the community level, perhaps there's a perception that girls should stay in the home and do not need an education. And then at the national level, perhaps there's a policy that girls are not allowed to go to school. So just to give like a very basic example of how different levels may be working together or working against each other to create barriers for gender equality. In this example, perhaps the national government realizes that this is an issue, and so they try to create a national policy to encourage girls to go to school, and then that creates changes in the other levels. So this is just a tool for us to use to consider where are the barriers and where are the opportunities in each of these levels when we're trying to create solutions for gender equality. And then we can also think in each of those levels about different stakeholders. So we have private sector, so private companies, NGOs, media outlets, academic institutions, and governments. So we can consider how each of these different actors could work together to help us to create or to promote gender equality, or they could also work against us if they're not on board with promoting gender equality. Okay. And then lastly, I wanted to share the 6 pillars that we use for a gender analysis. So these are really important for if you're designing a program to promote gender equality, considering each of these 6 points from a gender perspective. The first one is access to resources. So is there a difference between how men, women, non-binary people have access to resources in this particular area? Let's say it's in your immediate community. Do men own more land? Do men have more money? Do women have more education? And then time and space is about the access to time. So who has more free time? In a lot of communities, women have a lot more work, as we saw in the gender stereotypes. Women have a lot more responsibilities within the home, so they may not have as much time as men. So if you're offering, for example, scholarships to study technology, maybe you get more applicants from men because they have more time to take on these kind of programs. The legal rights and status, so what rights do people of different genders have in your community? Right to marriage, right to own property, right to bank accounts, all of those different legal rights that may affect your program. And then power and decision making is about who makes decisions within households, within families, and how could that affect whether women, men, and people of diverse genders would be able to participate in your project. And then knowledge, beliefs, and perceptions are the stereotypes that we were talking about earlier. So what kind of beliefs exist that could stop women, for example, from wanting to participate? Is there a belief that women are bad with computers, so they're not going to sign up to a technology course? So these kind of beliefs and perceptions about gender could affect the success of your program. And then practices and participation is about the willingness of people of different genders to participate in different initiatives. And what kind of practices do they have? What kind of activities are they already involved in their communities? Are men more involved in sports? So maybe if you have a sports program, it's going to be easier for them to participate than women. Okay. And just to wrap up, I wanted to share a case study of self-defense, which I did some research into across Latin America. So I conducted 5 interviews with instructors from Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Costa Rica, and Mexico. Just gonna do a quick time check. Okay, we're running a little bit behind, so I'm just going to give a really quick overview. So this is just to give you an example before you go into the breakout rooms of a program that aim to reduce gender inequality and violence against women. So it's based on the logic that the more violence against women and gender-based violence, the less equality, right? Because women are suffering from violence, so they have less opportunities to participate fully in society. So in this case study, the program taught physical, nonverbal, and verbal techniques to help prevent gender-based violence. And what we found is that one of the biggest challenges in the program is that we're working within a patriarchal system that's based on gender inequality and trying to change it from the inside out. So that was one of the biggest difficulties. We're trying to change a system, but we also need to work within that system. And another challenge were the misconceptions about self-defense, that it teaches participants to be violent, and that men should be taught not to be violent rather than teaching women, because the problem is with men, not with women. So these were some of the issues that came out that were sort of the barriers to the to being able to roll out this program. And the successes were that many instructors developed partnerships with different governments, which allowed them to create long-term and scalable programs, especially around key dates like the International Day Against Violence Against Women. And other instructors also developed relationships with NGOs and community organizations, which allowed them to roll out their programs to vulnerable communities. With academic institutions such as schools, instructors were able to reach adolescents and expand their programs. And through the private sector, there was interest in companies paying for self-defense classes for their employees, but that will also pose a barrier in some cases, because particularly male CEOs were not in favor of the idea of teaching women self-defense. And then in the media, there was also opportunities to promote self-defense, to promote respect for women through collaborations with media outlets. And it also allowed the instructors to share their techniques to a broader audience. So that's just a quick overview of one initiative and how they faced different barriers and opportunities according to the different stakeholders that I mentioned at the start of the presentation. So I hope that very, very quick overview gives you some ideas of how you can work with different stakeholders in your programs. And now I think it's time to jump into the breakout rooms. So these are the discussion questions. We can also maybe drop them in the chat so you can refer to them. So I think you have 15 minutes. We're a little bit behind time, but we'll give you a warning when you just have 1 minute left, so you can wrap up the discussion. But I would love to hear from you in the breakout rooms. What barriers do you see to gender equality in your communities? What do you think are the biggest barriers? And maybe you can choose one to focus on. And then what do you think could be done to reduce this barrier, and what stakeholders could be involved? And then also share if you know of any existing initiatives that are trying to reduce this barrier. Okay, so maybe I'll pass it back so that you can jump into the breakout rooms.
Yes, I'm aligning the rooms now.
Thanks.
So I think I'm gonna make groups in twos, so we can have dialogues. Everyone is back now. I will start with room 1. I had Natalia and Shantanu, who would like to reflect on the chat that you had. I was seeing the microphones burning up there, so I'm quite curious to find out. Who would like to share? Who would like to volunteer? Shall I take some bits from each of you? So there are aspects.
Maybe Shantu, you can, like, it was really interesting discussion, and obviously we were like so on the opposite polars. if I can say, where we're located. But yeah, I think Shantu, you can like just, if you don't mind, give some summary.
I was about to tell you the same thing, that maybe you can, but I'll just cover a little bit and then you can finish the rest of it. So what we really discussed was where we come from and where we are at the present moment. What do we see in terms of gender disparity? And she comes from Russia, I come from India. In general, there is definitely this patriarchal structure in which we are trying to fit in, and we are trying to save that structure somehow, which we know is not really working and won't be working, because it's like a car that is, one wheel is too big and another wheel is very small, so the car would fall definitely. So we were talking about it, and I shared the spiritual practice that I practice, and that has helped me personally and my community to become stronger. And she was sharing about a thing that I really appreciate, that to have this self mastery on the self when you are doing something wrong to someone else, to tell yourself, though this is wrong, I should stop right there. So that is very important. So I like that one. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shantana.
Yeah, just quickly to say like what my take was. So what I liked, what was interesting and inspiring as well, that Shantanu shared that because he's from
Brahma Kumari.
Brahma Kumari like religion, and so he said like in their practice they actually kind of not so much gender inequality there, because actually the leaders are female in that organization. And actually like it was interesting, the view that's actually from coming from men, actually, to hear that's because of their structure of organization for 70 years it was like practiced. And another thing that's actually they see the energy of each person, that they don't kind of focusing on gender rather than energy, as you as a being, then what you look like, what is your appearance. And what I shared, it was like kind of, I consider my community like Christian community, like we were talking more about it. And I just shared that in evangelical practices and in at least that's what I've seen in the Russian Orthodox Church. So the role of women actually limited to servants, and majority are leaders are men. So actually it's like kind of patriarchal focus. And but also there was an example here in but some evangelical churches, they have female preachers as well. So then they shift this, they give the representation of female preachers in there. But also, for example, I'm part of Anglican Church here, which actually supports LGBTQ, and they have female preachers, which is not so many churches does. So yeah, so that's what we were discussing. And also another interesting thing that's Shantanu shared, that's actually to become an observer. It's way to go to actually see what is going on. Like when you're inside the system, it's hard to see the change because you're part of it. But when you step back, actually then where you can see okay, what's going on, what we can change, and so what action we should do. Well, that's what I liked, that actually sometimes we need to take this observant seat and like reflect on like what are we doing and what's the best way to do. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Natalia. Jacinta, do you have any comments, or shall I continue with the second room?
I just want to thank you for sharing, both of you, and I really like that last comment about taking a step back to observe more from the outside and to see what needs to be changed, because as I mentioned, we grow up with all of these ideas and this notion that this is the way it is and that's it. So I really appreciate that contribution and all of the other comments as well. So thank you.
Thank you. In the room number 2, actually number 3, I had Anthony and also UKIYN. and Jacinta yourself, but I think I'll ask to the participants, and we'll start again with Anthony, with our male participant, and then continue with even if Anthony is available. Or
I think he had some connection issues in some moments, so.
okay, would you be happy to reflect on what you discussed in the room too, even?
Yeah, so I was telling Jacinta later, Anthony joined as well, that, well, I am from Brazil, and he was even used Brazil to, to show the gender gap in there. So it is quite bad. And then living now in the Netherlands, I feel even more, it's like this stepping back, right? So I feel even more how those differences, because growing up there with in my family, the women are expected. So those social expectations that you have to be a housewife, you should look for your family. You are discouraged to study and be independent. And even nowadays, I still hear from my mother that if there is some problems, or you are lucky that you have your partner to solve it for you. Or so those are small things, but if you are growing up accepting this as a norm, you are quite limited. And the way to go, that I think, because it's a very cultural problem, is within generations seeing more women occupying leadership positions, being at those positions that we are said that we should not go, and then the movement could open minds within time, I think.
Thank you, Ben. Do you have any additions, Anthony? Hello.
Hiya. I'm from Scotland, and so I would say that in Scotland we've got, you know, a tradition of sort of movements towards gender equality from the government. And you had obviously a female first minister for a long time. She just retired there, Nicola Sturgeon. And we also have an interfaith Scotland. In the world of interfaith, we've got women's groups just dedicated to women talking about different issues from different faith backgrounds. I think that's probably one of the main issues I would say in, you know, my own context in Scotland, is that different religious groups have different views of gender, and that can be a challenge. And I think that, you know, trying to navigate that is just about focusing on the key aspects, and everyone should be free to pursue what sort of goals they want to pursue, and to marry who they want to marry and things like that, and to, you know, to pursue the sort of career they want to pursue. And I think that's a challenge. And I think, you know, we have to have a dialogue with different communities, and we have to try and highlight, you know, that gender equality is important and things like that. So I suppose that's the only thing I would have to say about, you know, the context in Scotland. It's not much, but that's all I can think of.
Thank you, Anthony. Do you have any comment again, Jacinta, or shall I continue with the next room, which is the last one as well?
Just to say, yeah, we had a really interesting discussion in our group because, well, I mean, moved from Brazil to the UK and Netherlands, and I moved from Australia to Costa Rica. So we've had like these experiences of different levels of gender equality throughout the world, and then hearing about Scotland as well. So it was just really interesting to share how different it is in all of these different places. Thanks.
Thank you, Jacinta. And the next group, last but not least, was with Greshma, Srihari, and also Yahuza and Nelly. Who would like to go first? I have so many names at the moment, I cannot pick this time. Shall I start with you, Greshma, and then maybe the rest names would like to add on? I know Srihari joined us to the breakout room.
Yeah, like we shared like how our countries are, like Nelly is from DR Congo, and I joined from India, and Srihari from Scotland. and Ehusa has some issues with voice, so couldn't share. So what we discussed is like how like in our communities, men have like more powerful voice than women, and um like still there are like a patriarchal mindset, but there are like lots of initiatives are coming up to break that at the national level or like in the policy level, but still we need to translate that policies into actions, and actions are also coming up. And when I deeply reflect on my community and how the gender balance is happening, there are like lots of difference are coming up, especially for the transgenders. There are like more rights and more people are coming up. They are getting like more opportunities, and when they started like sharing about their identities, now the family is also accepting that, and family is also supporting. It's very different from like previous years, but now we can see that parents are supporting for their marriages and their relationships. So there are like a very positive change can be seen in my communities. And also one thing I really feel is the change come to the media and how the films shows this kind of relationships, and how they change their like wedding, or like how they express about the woman earlier, like women or even the men. There were like lots of stereotypes in the earlier films or movies in India, but these days they are like the filmmakers are more conscious about that, and they are really using very accurate words and like gender conscious words, and they are avoiding like all the forms, like not all the forms, but they're trying their best to avoid the body shaming kind of words, or like, so the change are really visible in the movies. So that I feel like movies are really influence people. So when what we see in the movies, that also influence people. So people are also started changing and accepting this. And yeah, so that's from my side, and I hope Srihari would like to share more.
Thank you, Greshma. Yahuza, I heard that you had a microphone problem. If you'd like to share anything, you can also use the chat. Srihari, do you have any additions to Greshma's point? Or Nelly?
I'm really sorry that I've joined so late. So I was telling Reshma, I was trying to catch the pulse of the discussion that was happening. And so unfortunately, I don't have anything clever or wise to add, just because I've completely missed the pulse of what was being discussed. But I think what was being discussed is the challenges in the society. And first of all, I'd like to thank Anthony for giving a shout out to Interface Scotland. I'm one of the board members of Interface Scotland, and I totally watch what Anthony said, that our director is a woman, Maureen Sire, and our chair of the board is a woman. And they both do an absolutely fantastic job steering the organization. So going back to the challenges, I was giving example of the misinformation seeds that were sown into the minds of Indians around 16 and towards the end of 1600 or 1700, and how that influenced an entire 3 or 4 coming generations about the criminality of being gender fluid. And as Reshma was just introducing, in the recent times, seeds are being sown again that gender can be a fluid concept, and it's not really a fixed masculine or femininity. And more than a challenge, I'm seeing as an opportunity just now that there is a awesome opportunity just now to sow a seed, which would probably make things change in the next 3 or 4 generations, that gender is fluid. And and that everyone is equal and everyone has exactly the same potential to achieve and live a life that they want. So I think the challenge is to accept that we need to sow this seed and then know that we won't get a result in this generation, but maybe in the next generation or the generation after that. But I think that's all I could catch the pulse of the discussion. So I'll just mute myself now. Thank you.
Thank you, Sri Hari. Your points were quite, I think, meaningful for each of us, because regardless what background we are from, we do have the similarity, the huge similarity of what you just said regarding the problems in gender-based problems. Nelly, do you have any comments on, or would you like to share it on the in the chat? I have one comment actually, which I wasn't in any of the breakout rooms. I'm actively part of a social anthropology group, which are working actively in southern part of Turkey in the villages, which are small in numbers villages. There are about 16 villages, which they live with a different culture, which obviously is not too different to what we've learned or what we've heard perhaps in our lives. So they do respect too much their leaders. I'm not talking about faith leader necessarily. I'm talking about the elderly people, that they have too much respect, which those elderly group of people are kind of the commanders of their lives, the young people's lives. And I want to grab your attention to child marriage. I know it's not gender-based, but technically it's gender-based as well. And there are some societies where their elderlies think that men should just take on whatever the family employment is or family business is, and that happens in very young age. So the boys also shouldn't, I mean, they don't go to school at all. They just go to maybe, if they are lucky, to first 3 years of primary school or 5 years. And then when they turn age 15, which is quite late yet, they need to get married, and age 13 is for a girl. When biologically they are considered as women, not girl anymore. And they cannot study because they just have to get married. So they are just useful for the continuation of the family name. So we started that research. I mean, I'm not part of the startup of the project, but I'm member of the project, and we are trying to educate people, perhaps second generation or third generation, but not the elderly age groups, because they don't accept our presence there. In that life is not only about what a name, an older name tells you, but actually there are so many things as an individual you can do. Perhaps you can pick another employment, or you can educate yourself, but don't do anything, right? Like it's basically more than that, more than whatever a group of 4 people or 3 people tell you. So just wanted to add this here, because I find it quite extreme. I'm not referring to culture. We cannot live without our cultures. They are kind of part of our identity, but the understanding of that there is only 3 or 4 names who can kind of guide our lives, I find that quite controlling and quite extreme to accept. that was it, Jacinta. I think now is question and answer time. If there are further questions or comments, I think I would like to receive it. Just unmute yourself, or you can raise your hand and ask your question, or you can leave your feedback. You can always use the chat too. Anthony. Anthony, I think he wanted to send it to the everyone part, but he sent it to me. So apparently interfaith marriage is often an issue even in Scotland. And he was referring to different interfaith marriages which were causing problems and difficulties in their societies. Yeah.
I think it ties into the, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, Anthony, we can hear you.
The connection's quite bad. I think it ties into the point you made about child marriage, because I just thought of that thing when you were talking about it, that child marriage doesn't really, I mean, there have been instances where we've had, there have been one or two marriages that they've tried to contract that have been underage, and thankfully the law steps in, but there are still a lot of forced marriages in the UK and in Scotland, and it's not often talked about, and it's a serious issue. And I think that it's the best thing I can think of is action through the schools. But the teachers have a lot of I was actually teaching in school a few years ago, and it's certainly an issue. And I think that I have met people who have been through these issues, and interfaith marriage is becoming very common because we're living in a pluralist society, and I think that's a good thing. But I think it's also about how do we articulate this in dialogue, because a lot of religious identities are very, very conservative, and I think that's very, very difficult to try and work out how we can get around these problems. It's just an observation. It's nothing, but it's just it's one of the issues that I've seen in my own sort of social circle in Scotland.
Yeah, I agree with you, Anthony. And weird fact, but some of the young people that we had interviewed, they actually believe in this, and they just feel half if they don't get married by age 15, or if they don't take on the family business, is just super disrespectful for them, as if they are rejecting their family, kind of. So yeah. But it relies on, under the education, I believe, like showing them their rights, their values as an individual, not just as the family name or what the family name should carry on. There are some messages in the chat. Thank you, Shantanu, for joining us. Nelly has a comment on gender equality is a barrier, but it is a good for any women to promote and develop strategies and take decision on appropriate areas for intervention to address these barriers and constraints identifies. Develop gender equality change in gender relations. Yeah, that was what we were all basically commenting on. I think there are not any other questions or comments, Jacinta. I think we are approaching towards the end of this webinar. Hi, Ben, welcome. Well, let's take it. Yeah.
How are you? How everyone? I just coming from the conference from Sarajevo. We talk about the crisis Ukraine Western Balkans civil society, full of the religious communities and also the women religious community. In this fact, we are equal together. Yeah. Gender equality in religious community is very important. I think we must work hard to change some conservative minds in our communities. But together, in specific for youth practicals in our religious communities. I am in car, and I apologize because I come later, but I will be away in the time in the future. Thank you very much. And
No, not to worry at all, Ben. Thank you for joining us. And I'm actually so happy to see more male names joined us tonight rather than female names. It may look similar, but considering Greshma, myself, and Natalia, and even being RFP UK staff, Jacinta is our guest speaker. We technically received only one female name who joined, who participated, and that is great because we are really together in this. It's not that there is no discrimination towards men or stereotypic understanding of men. We are similar, you know, as much as there are for female hate talks or, you know, stereotypic talks is similar amount towards men. Like I really liked a comment when we were doing the interactive quizzes, men don't cry. That is not a rule. Who invented this? So yeah, I'm thankful to each of the wise comments and sharings that we received tonight. Jacinta, please feel free to conclude your ending comments, and I think we can wrap up this webinar then. And Greshma, you too.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone for your participation, your comments and reflections. I think it was a really enriching conversation, and it gives me a lot to think about of what are the ways forward so that we all can continue working together for gender equality. Thank you.
Thanks, Jacinta. And thank you so much to all participants who joined for this conversation today. And please, and this session we call like gender equality, let's talk and practice. So like after each session, we always share that now it's time to act, and now it's time to transform our own life and think about how we can work more for achieving the gender equality. So thank you so much, Jacinta, for doing this wonderful session with interactive quizzes that really help to reflect on our own thoughts. So thank you once again for joining today. And this, so with this session, we complete our first stage of UKIYN EcoPeace Cafe project, and we will be having our next stage from September 15. So stay tuned for more details. We will be sharing more details and more exciting news in the coming weeks. Thank you. Thanks from my side, and over to you, Eda.
Thank you so much again for joining us. I wish you have all a pleasant evening, pleasant morning or afternoon, and take care. Thank you, Jacinta, for your presentation as well. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
See you soon. Bye.